All right. Welcome to IBC 2019. Sorry, guys. My name is Carl Soule. I've been working for Adobe for 15 years. And I spent 5 years of that actually living overseas in Singapore and worked with broadcasters from Korea to New Zealand to India. And I'm joined on stage today. We are live streaming from the IBC show floor. Let me introduce Aurelie Gonin.
Sure.
Okay. Aurelie's a director. She specializes in mountain sports video, and you literally shoot video from just anywhere, some of the most remote locations in the world.
From mountains, yeah. So
Absolutely.
to remote places.
And to introduce Aurelie a little bit more, let's quickly roll a little bit of a video. All right. Wonderful, Aurelie. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to introduce next Simon Green.
Hello.
Simon, you started a post-production facility in 2008 and have gone on to direct award-winning BAFTA documentaries.
Yeah, so we've sort of diversified from a post facility into a content creation agency, yeah.
Full on, you deal with branding and have a customer base that kind of spans all over the world.
Yeah, we've sort of moved from broadcasters and then diversified into brands too, yeah, so it's an interesting array.
Awesome. Let's roll a short video and introduce Simon.
Hey, what's up, guys? My name is Dev.
Gonin Live, how you doing?
Allow me to reintroduce myself.
There are so many stories about the amazing courage shown by footballers on the front line.
The female defendant concocted the murder.
Book now for the cultural event of the summer, broadcast live from the British Museum.
And what have the hippies done so far? Have they ruined anything?
I can't comment on that, sir.
Very nice. Very nice. So we're going to spend the next hour or so. I wanted to talk with both of you about what the challenges are in delivering content anywhere in the world. Both of you have experience, whether it's shooting in remote locations and having to deliver for major brands like Red Bull, to working with a customer base that, your production facilities are in one location and having to work with customers and have this content delivered everywhere. Really quickly, Aurelie, why don't you start by just describing what it is you do?
So I'm working mostly for sport events, and as you've seen, mountain sports. So when you work on a production like that, it's like it's yourself who has to adapt to the sport. Like it's not the competition that's gonna wait for you because
Right.
it depends from so many factors like the snow conditions, the safety, the weather. So you really have to be ready and you really have to be where things happen. So that's why when we work on that, we produce different type of videos, and one of them is a live webcast. So we bring the live setup to the mountain. So we have to heli the equipment and bring some power supply because, of course, there's nothing. So we
Right.
have some generators, and then we need to have the link with the audience. So of course we need to broadcast. And depending to where we are on which mountains, we use some satellite connection, or we can use some IP bridge to maybe a restaurant which is on a ridge behind.
Wow. Okay.
You know, like you have to. Usually we try to have two solutions, like to have a backup. But of course, depending to where you are, you have to choose one or the other. And so I would say for us, the difficulty is to have power and to have internet.
Wow. I feel some of your pain. I once did a presentation in kind of a remote side of East Mumbai that they literally walked in with like a T1 line, like somebody was carrying and rolling out the cable down the street.
Exactly,
And that
for
was our
us it's in
connection.
a deep powder, but it's the same. Like you have to adapt to where you are, and it's not because you are in high technology countries like Japan or USA that it's easier, because like Alaska is part of USA, and in Alaska you're far from everything.
Absolutely.
So of course you will never get any phone signal or anything. Everything is on satellite. So it makes it, of course, more tricky, but it's what is exciting in this job as well.
Absolutely. Simon, why don't you explain a little of what you do?
So my background is really in post-production. So I started life as an editor, and that's how Greenrock began, was a traditional broadcast facility, and we still do that. We're London's only premiere-only facility.
Thank you.
Welcome. And that's been great for us. But I think, with this in mind, the demand for content is just growing and growing and growing, and people are trying to get as much out of budgets as possible. So as we diversified into production, so having a background in post and the importance of understanding delivery at scale helped us as we diversified into production. And then last year we also opened a small YouTube-style studio in central London. And all of that really is for us to kind of, work with brands and organisations who are trying at the same time to scale up with their productions and understand how do you do that in a really effective way. And the exciting bit for us is you can do that from anywhere. And from planning and production and then into post-production, the tools are there to do that. And we've been fortunate enough to work on some projects that have been able to push that for us a bit.
Awesome. How does Greenrock go through and help brands like really deliver in a digital first environment? Is that
So I was talking about it this morning actually. So I think for us, our background began in broadcast, and actually understanding that. I mean, it's funny because I'll go to some events, and a couple of years ago at the Edinburgh Television Festival, the whole thing was like, is television dying? And that's for another topic. But I think the roots and the learnings from that as an industry is so important, because you're standing on 100 years worth of practice.
Absolutely.
The BBC have been doing, and in that time they've had to rethink how they do their business, from radio into television into colour into live, and you forget how many reversions they've had to do. And in a brand world, they've been doing it for kind of 5 or 6 years. So actually, the skill sets you have from a broadcast environment, not to kind of outdo any people that are doing it out their bedroom and stuff, but actually there is a way of thinking and planning that when you are looking at doing this in a global, collaborative way, just understanding the planning cycle of that. I think having that broadcast background. So we work with a lot of big brands and organisations who have this problem. They're disparate, working either nationally or internationally from lots of different pockets within their organisation. And what we go in and say is like, if you think like a publisher or a broadcaster would, you would map all of this out into a clear content schedule and work out what is the most effective way of doing that with as long a lead time as possible. I mean, if you think the BBC are probably planning Christmas next year,
Yeah,
and if they
absolutely.
didn't, we'd all turn on the TV and it would just be a blank screen. So it's that level of planning now that in a world where everyone is trying to do 10 times the amount of content for the same amount of money, you've got to think like a broadcaster in that sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. Seeing all the live production in particular, that used to be the realm. You had to be a BBC in order to deliver live to an audience with satellite and everything else. And now both of you are part of that market of just delivering to the globe. So it's something you definitely have to think about more. Anything?
I think the evolution of video is fantastic because, as we were saying, when we were kids, like making a video was you needed to have some parents to have some equipment, to have some money. Nobody had computers, so it was very difficult technically, and it needed a lot of money. And now, like every kid who has an idea can make a video, and I think that's fantastic. And of course, live still requires some professional equipment. Well, not really. Like if you're here, you can be live on your phone. But when you're making things a bit, I would say, more professional, and like in my example, in some remote places, you need some bigger equipment to make sure it works. Your phone will die because of the cold anyway. So.
Yes,
Yeah,
I've actually
so-
run into that at Sundance. I've seen that happen with the phone just suddenly shutting off.
Yeah, you can. You have. That's why you need professional equipment too, because
Absolutely.
you can. You know that it's gonna work, and same with the batteries, with everything.
Wow. What's like the bigger assignments that each of you have had? Simon, you want to go first with like the customer brands and?
Yeah, so it's funny. Greenrock is split because we have our post facility and a production unit and a studio and some VFX capability. So we have some partners that just work in some of those buckets, and then we have some that kind of work all the way through, which has been really great. But it's funny, I suppose a lot of our output, we still deliver a lot to Netflix and the BBC and Sky, certainly in our post-production capability. And then the brands that we work with range from big organisations like NatWest, global architects like Arup, and we're just starting to work with some big brands out in Los Angeles as well, actually, which is it's great for us because the way we've set up the business, which is really kind of pushing our cloud-based workflows actually to kind of test that internationally is really great.
Oh. Aurelie?
For me, it's very. It depends to where we are. Like I was talking about Alaska. In Alaska, you have to take a heli to go to your location because like skiing there is too far. It wouldn't be an option. So you really have to take heli. And in a heli, you put like 4 or 5 passengers, depending to what heli you use. So what we try when we work on that is to be the smallest team because it takes hours to bring everybody on the mountain and to bring everybody down. And you depend to the weather. So if the clouds are coming and the heli cannot fly, you need to have these people who are spending the night on the mountain. So we try to be the smallest group, which is maybe like 20 people for the video, including the technician for the live, the camera operators, everything. But on some events that are more in a resort, like in Verbier in Switzerland, we are, I would say, 60 to 80 people for the video. So it's a bigger setup for the live. And I've been working for some Red Bull event. I think of one which is a world run.
Oh, wow.
So everybody is running at the same time from everywhere on the planet, and you have some lives from each location. And then in Austria, they mix all these lives to make a global live.
Wow.
So
okay.
if you add
That's
all
literally
these,
production from anywhere, yeah.
yeah,
Wow.
I remember in some countries it was just some 4G lives, like sometimes it was shot with phones, very like the
Quality
lowest.
is very low. And,
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
But
You have a live. And of course, in major countries like Austria, like France, USA, it was a big production. And we were, I would say, like maybe 80 people for France. Austria was even bigger. And then you have these huge mixed room, you know, with some guys ingesting the lies from 40 countries.
Wow.
And then deciding in which live, you know, taking some parts and, you know, making it smaller and smaller. So then it comes to the last director who's choosing from what is pre-choose by the others. So if you add all these people from all these countries, it's a lot of people.
Definitely. Just as a question for both of you, when it comes to working in this space, what are the biggest trends that you're seeing, or anything that you've seen here at IBC this year that's kind of making you like rethink how you do business?
I think we're seeing change very quick. I mean, I think that, you know, certainly Greenrock and some of the organisations we're working with is just demand and consumption. You know, I just think that there is, you know, the demand for content is only going one way, and I think we're just seeing organisations recognising that they need to pivot quite quickly in order to keep up with that, because we've moved away from certainly in a kind of marketing space. I think they're starting to move away from kind of a campaign-led approach to marketing, you know, like a Christmas campaign or a summer campaign, whatever that be, and it's much more about engaging your audience in a conversation and building a relationship with them, and that's done through video content. And I was sharing in some of the slides earlier. I think like 95% of people will convert through a sale from watching a video. And, you know, so that's quite a powerful stat. So if you're not really thinking about how you're planning and producing video content that is of high quality, regular and engaging, and not, you know, we were just talking earlier about how you can over promote, putting brand placement and stuff, and that's a big turn off now. So it's just got to be great content, great editorial content.
I always think of like the Wayne's World, the spoof on that, with them, you know, drinking the soda.
That's just really sad.
You know, that's kind of where it's been for years.
Yeah,
and now it's more about just kind of having that as on the periphery.
Exactly. And so I think that is, you know, I think that's what we're seeing more and more. And I think, you know, how do you do that at scale without
and be authentic about it as well?
It's really key. But it is, you know, it's an operation, as we were saying at the top. You know, it's about understanding what kind of operation does that look like. And so we work with a lot of organisations where, you know, I think historically organisations, it's quite secular. They'll go out of outhouse to find an agency to do it, and then they'll be, it's too expensive, so we'll bring it all in-house, and then the kit, you know, collects dust and the people move away, so they go back out. And I think now what
continues.
Exactly. But whereas I think now, you know, in order to kind of deliver the kind of scale that is required and the quality that's required, I think there is this hybrid relationship where within marketing teams or internal communications where you can say that we know what we need to deliver, but we have some capability or capacity gaps. How do we come together to do that? And so I think that's what we're seeing more of now, and I think that's something that we'll build. And I think the other thing that's quite interesting is seeing how people from a broadcast world, in terms of strategic planning and thinking, are coming into brands. I mean, I think we've kind of seen it a bit with some commissioners moving from like Discovery Channel to Apple and things like that. And I think we'll start to see more of that as well. I think we'll start to see, you know, broadcast commissioners moving into brands and organisations, so they really start thinking about it as a proper channel.
Anything to add?
I would say that, I agree with you. Like the evolution I see that there is more and more video, and the budget are not growing, and everybody wants to have a live. So what is interesting in a place like IBC is to see that everybody is trying to find the solution to make good quality at a lower budget, and creating some tools so you can do it faster. Like you have all these things about tracking, automatic tracking, which can be some robots that is gonna pilot the cameras, so the camera follow what happens in front of them. You don't need a camera operator anymore. Or you see in your softwares all this automatic tracking, or like the rescaling.
Oh, the auto reframe.
The reframe, or like you have all these new tools to help people to produce faster and in better quality. And it's good to come in a place like that to see that they exist, because maybe you have the solution, where maybe the solution exists, but you don't know. So I think it's very interesting to see this.
So I was out with a couple of guys last night who do a huge amount of content, and we were just saying in this same sort of conversation is everyone's trying to produce more content at a higher quality. I think what we've also seen, quite recently is how AI just helps get rid of some of that grunt work of like encoding, clipping, and things like that. And that helps you, because something has to be given up to the machines, and the kind of non-creative stuff. Because I think while you're trying to spend wisely, and like it does, at the end of the day, it comes down to a budget thing. Where do you want to spend your money? And it's got to be on quality storytelling, not spending money on ingest and things like that. So I think we're seeing that certainly in a tech space is how can we get through that kind of ingest time quicker, get projects set up faster, so that you can get to where you want to spend the money, which is getting great storytellers or great experts who know how to use the tools to use the tools. So I think that's something else that's quite exciting to see. From the reframing stuff or the character stuff that we've also seen as well.
I agree. It's just like you don't focus on the techniques anymore. You just focus on your storytelling, and it's the part which is interesting. Like we come from prehistory when we were spending a day just doing the ingest, and now nobody can imagine seeing a highlight 2 days after something happened.
Yeah, well, we've got a job. I think we're starting in a few weeks, which is 40 streams of 4K material coming in, and they're like, it's going to be shot yesterday. We need it to, but the thing is, you expect it now. The editor's just like, well, I just expect it all to be there in sync, ready to go the next day, and you're like, okay.
Yeah, but also with the servers, because you can start working on a file while it's being created.
And that's really, I think that's a really good point as well. Like being able to just keep adding and collaborating without having to stop. I think certainly, because when I was editing, that's how it kind of was. You had to get everything in and then stop working, get new content. And I think now it's a much more agile way of working, which is amazing.
Even some of the clients that I deal with in Hollywood now, we're starting to see there's still a very regimented workflows of this happens, then this happens, then this happens. But recently I worked on a help consult on a film that they're actually doing the cutting on set with the idea that the editor actually wanted to get the footage from the camera quicker, but the insurance company wouldn't let him touch the cards until they had gone through a backup process. But he literally wanted to have them moments after every shot so that he could just check continuity and really feel like they were getting everything they needed, because they don't have the budget for reshoots and they wanted to kind of avoid that. So
that's really interesting. So just coincidentally, I'm not working in Hollywood yet. I'm available there if you want. But we had on our street just a few weeks ago, Edgar Wright was filming on our street just outside our post facility. But really interestingly, like they had set up a little marquee, and the editor was in there because Edgar does everything to music.
Right.
And so for him, it's so important that he can see it.
The timing.
The timing has to be absolutely spot on. So if you don't have that technology, then all our editors were out going, "Oh, what are you doing?" But of course, it makes sense when you're doing something that's that creative but that precise. That's where technology has to kind of be there. You don't have time to then wait to download it, ingest it, line it up.
Or wait for the film to be developed.
Yeah.
I started my career in 35 millimeters, and you were seeing the footage the next day.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
Where you could record like a videotape, but
yeah.
It was, of course, not the same quality. And
no. So.
Well, while we're talking about technology a little bit, what's some of the biggest technology challenges that you still face in the way you work?
I would say it's power, just like because where I work it's so cold. Sometimes I cannot even start my computer because I don't accept, to work in a very low temperature. So then you get we have some heaters, in the live production tent, but
You have to get the heaters going so that the generator will start. So that sometimes.
And that's it sounds very basic, but without electricity, you don't do anything, and so otherwise you use your body heat to warm up your computer, and then it starts. And what we do is then once everything is started, you never stop the things. So we set up the live tent as soon as we arrive in a location. And then we have some technician who sleep in the tent during all the weather window to make sure that when the competition will happen, it will work. And so they have to refuel every 6 hours. So they get up at night to refuel the generator. Wow. It's of course not the most exciting part, but if you have no power supply, nothing happens.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
And you can also have a competition and film it, and not being live if you have a satellite issue. But I would say the first thing is having power for your cameras, having battery that can handle a day in the cold, having your cameras working, because we know that some models cannot work well in the cold. So I would say it's not the most challenging technology, but it's really what we need.
Wow. Simon, I imagine power is probably not an issue in London, but
no, we do all right.
I'm thinking, dealing with customers in remote locations, like some of the challenges on review and approval and working back and forth. What are you running into today?
Yeah, I mean, it's moving very quickly. I think I think you mentioned it. I think internet speed is a challenge, because even though internet speed is getting faster, file sizes are getting bigger. 8K, and who else? Who knows where it's going to be in the next few years. So I think that's always a challenge. But then codecs and encoding really help get around that. But again, I think as soon as the internet is able to kind of be fast enough to handle it, volumes, file size seem to go up with it. So at some stage that's going to have to catch up, and it just needs to be kind of democratized that a little bit better. But I think largely it's something that we've paid careful attention to as we look to grow our business, because certainly in our post environment and from our studio, we have half a dozen edit suites in central London, and given that it's not cheap to be to have any business in central London, so really if you're looking to grow, how do you do that, and how do you use cloud-based workflows to do that? So for us, we use team projects to help collaborate so that we can set up a lot of content from our centralized hub in London. We use Base Media Cloud to host our storage there, and that's been great because it integrates perfectly with Premiere. So as a workflow, we've kind of used that tool set to then think, okay, how can we use our editors who aren't always based in central London, and also they might not want to come into central London. I mean, it feels like the broadcast industry is the last industry to embrace flexible living, and I think internet and access to content is one of those hurdles. But actually, if you can get past that hurdle, you're actually embracing and getting access to a great raft of operators from all around the world, whether it's editors, VFX, designers, whatever it may be, and they might not all be in the UK, or you might want to use the time zone to your advantage, like we do when we work out in LA. So I think that's been something that's key. It's been a hurdle that we've embraced and used as part of our business, and it's certainly something that as we continue to grow, it's outside a bricks and mortar model, and actually going into organisations to say, you're trying to produce more content, you don't want to spend crazy money on a central London Soho edit facility, you just need it fast and accessible, and if you can just do that on a laptop with a 20 meg connection, and here's all your materials sat on a cloud that you can stream over proxy, brilliant, off you go. And that's, it's one of the pieces to delivering fast and efficient, at a right price point. That's where technology's at. But yeah, internet is a long-winded way of saying it can be tripped up by the internet, but it's getting there.
And I totally agree. Like, now you don't need to be in a big city to edit. Like, you were asking where I live. I live in Colorado, so it's USA, but where I live is a remote house. So there's no internet where I have satellite internet, but there's no way I can stream even proxies from there. So what you use is a UPS. Right. You have people sending you a drive, and you drive to town and grab the drive, and it takes 1 day. But for me, it's way faster to receive a drive than to try to download some files.
That's it. And I think it's going to take a couple of years to get there. But I think that's still a pretty common way of working, and it's robust. But I think
I know it's not the future. It's more, but as you say, the files are keep growing. So for everybody that always have a good internet connection, so you need to have a plan B, and sending drives.
We did have the horror story a couple of years ago. We were working on a series for HBO, and we explained to the production team because they needed to get their content from Singapore back to our facility in London to do the finishing, and it seemed a bit. It was tight. The time was against us, and budgets, etc. So we said, look, just put it all into our storage, our base media storage, and they didn't. They said, oh, don't worry, we'll just send a whole bunch of drives, and they did that, and they were missing in the post. It was like the horror story that you kind of tell people it will never happen, and it happened. Oh, no. And you're like, well, what can we do? So we did then go back, and they uploaded it to our storage, and we could carry on, and then eventually they found the drives and carrying on. So there are horror stories that do happen.
Kind of on that same vein, I work with a broadcaster in Southeast Asia that had this grand plan for everybody working from anywhere, allowing editors to edit from home. They redesigned a new building around this whole model. And then there was a hack of another broadcaster, I believe in France, where the network was actually taken down. This caused a rethink of the whole plan, this 5-year plan that had been put in place. And suddenly they were asking us, can we get tape decks again? Can we bring in and do traditional editing? Have you guys dealt with security being any concern in what you do?
It's a really important question, because I think whenever you start talking about cloud-based workflows, for some particularly, I think it's less so. I think in sort of fast turnaround TV productions like entertainment. But I think when you're working with like we work with supermarkets, banks, insurance companies. It's often sensitive information, and so when you say we're going to set up a cloud-based workflow, they're like, no, we're not. And so security is it's fundamental to it. And the guys we use at Base, they're a DPP approved encryption security on their storage, but also the workflow that we enable through that is that not only is the asset stored in the cloud, but actually you can edit. You wouldn't be able to do it from Colorado, I'm afraid, but if you have a decent enough internet connection, you can actually stream into Premiere just using streaming proxies and actually edit from that. So you're never actually downloading assets to your machine. It's all just happening.
So a contractor can walk away clean, and you don't have to worry about.
No, exactly. So it's essentially like your laptop or your whatever you're using. The screen and the keyboard are essentially like being connected to the actual tower in a data center anywhere in the world, and the latency is incredible. So, and that just means that you're still getting that kind of operational result, but you're not worrying about assets that are potentially sensitive being downloaded and then or in a drive getting lost in the post. You can just fire it up for a day, say, I need you to work on this. They're working from home or wherever, and then when it's finished, that's it. They just log out and they'll never see that content again. So that's a really important way of working.
Seems like in the world you live in, it's less about someone stealing content and having the elements and the weather and everything else cause a failure to lose content. But have you dealt with any security?
I would say not really, because I'm a bit paranoid. So even if we work with drives, I always want to have different copies of drives and in different locations. So it can be just different hotel rooms or like office, a tent, and because you cannot really trust them. But honestly, I'm pretty impressed by the solidity of these drives. We never had much issue.
Good. If anybody has any questions for Aurelie and Simon, already, yes. Would you like to move up front here just so we can?
Sorry.
What camera equipment do you use that's reliable in the weather? And the
Like
weight?
your first question was about the batteries. Yeah. So we use different type of cameras. It goes from the GoPros because every rider has a GoPro on them when they ski. We use some long lens cameras that could be some f/65 or GVC cameras. So this one, like, you cannot ski with them, or if you can, one ski with a body, another one ski with a lens because it's pretty heavy. But for these cameras, we can have big equipment because usually they're brought by helis with all the production setup. And then we have some other smaller ones like FS7, or we can have some very small like Alpha 7, GH5, Sony, or some Nikon Z7. You know, like myself, when I do some shootings on my own, I try to get the smallest equipment as I can because I need to be mobile, and usually I climb up the mountains with the athletes. So if I have, these guys are way stronger than I am, and they're not here to wait for me all day, you know, so I have to be efficient. So to be efficient, I have to be light. Sorry? I like the Nikon Z7 and the GH5, the Panasonic, which are very small, or we use some red cameras for some other movies. It depends, you know, from exactly what you're doing. But some that I'm doing, which are very mountaineering, where I know I need to, like, you know, skin up and then climb the mountain, I will try to take the lightest and with the less accessories. Like, I will take a zoom lens because it's very tricky to change your lens in the snow because you don't want the snow to get in your camera. So you can try, but if the less you do it, the better. And I'm not gonna put like a screen or whatever because I want it to be very compact, light, and you know, I hold it outside of my backpack and I'm ready to shoot. Like if something happens, I'm not gonna take my backpack away, open it, like take 15 minutes to set up my camera, and then it's a cloud came and there's no light anymore. You know. Yeah, and it depends from the size of the project and like how long it takes. When we are with a heli, you know, it's easier because they just drop you, and so you can have big and heavy equipment. But
Yeah.
But,
Thank you so much for the questions.
Red camera for the slow motion, but. When you're alone and you have to be with the athletes, I choose a very light equipment.
I had trouble bringing my camera equipment here just to Amsterdam, so I'm
really?
amazed at how you guys travel and you're able to get to these incredible places.
And you travel with ski bags and everything, so
I ran afoul of the airline I've traveled on had like a 12 kg limit on carry-on bags, and I hadn't run into that before. I guess I lost my status on the airlines.
Sorry.
So
you have to pretend that your bag is light.
They
when
put
you
it
go
on a
in the
scale
plane.
this time. I've never seen them do that before. So it was suddenly this moment of, it was like a game of Jenga. Like if I move this here and I move this here, and if I wrap this lens around in my socks and put that in my, you know, it was crazy. Crazy
I've been
time at the
traveling
airport.
with a server, and it was very difficult in the planes because you don't want to put that in
Yeah.
your luggage.
Exactly.
Because as you were talking about security, you cannot imagine that it can be lost. You know, there's a lot of value of the footage
Absolutely.
which is on it. So you want to keep it with you, but it's hard to get in a plane with a server and go through security and like, what is this box?
Yeah, exactly. You get the questions at the security gate, and they want you to power it up and everything else. We'll take a couple more questions. I have one last question for you guys. Just one of the amazing things about both of your stories is just you've created this global presence that I always think of in the past. You know, the companies that would have these global presences would be like a BBC or a NBC, or these large networks with satellite uplinks and everything else. This seems to be the new norm, where people have this global presence with social media and everything else. What would you guys, if you have any advice for aspiring content creators, for people who want to do what you do, what would you recommend?
I would say don't be afraid to be small, because technique is something, but creativity is another. And you don't need to have 10 grand to make a video now. You can go at very low budget. And if you have a good idea and you have a good story to tell, I think it's what matters. It's like when you write, it doesn't matter what kind of pen you use. What matters is what you write. Of course, it makes a difference with the image and everything, but I think what matters the most is your story. So if you have one, just go ahead.
Nice.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think big brands and organisations are actually embracing working with smaller teams as well. So there's a lot of encouragement for aspiring filmmakers out there to think actually you can get the ear of some important decision makers, and I think, given that we're at a time now where probably a lot of millennials are now taking roles in big organisations that are making decisions, and they're not afraid of working with smaller teams. And I think, for everything that I said earlier, I think actually these big 1980s style agencies are having to break up and become much more agile themselves, because they're like oil tankers, and they can't, it's in a fast turnaround, always on world of making video content. Quite often they're a bit too sluggish to move and react and be that proactive about making video content. So I think there's we're seeing. I mean, I would consider ourselves, it's kind of a smaller team, and we work with big agencies, but we're able to deliver big projects very quickly, fast turnaround, and you just don't get that from big organisations. So it's just thinking about taking a lot of that sting out of the process for these big organisations, because the demand, all the management that goes with that, the more you can be thinking about and being proactive and partnering up with people, the better. So if you are a small company but a good VFX company, or a good production company, if you can wrap a bow around that and go to organisations and say, look, we've got all of your problems solved between the three of us, but you're going to get some best-in-class creators from that, then that's a really good way of working.
Wow. It seems like there's a lot of trust that's kind of come out of this as well, where when you get a client and they say run with something, you have to really act very quickly and not be proactive, but also reactive to what else is happening out in the social space. I was just thinking about, like, in America, there's been this kind of Twitter war going back and forth between two fast food chains over chicken sandwiches recently. And it's whoever runs those, if you are kind of helping to drive that brand, you just have to be able to think on your feet and ask forgiveness maybe after the fact.
No, it's a really good point. I think if you're a big organization or a small organization, if you're doing everything around video, whether it's content, advertising, PR, etc., if everything is reactive, you will fall over. So it's thinking about, right, well, I understand my operation, I need to be doing video content here, I need to be running my events here. And we sort of say to some of our partners, like, if you can get to a point where 70% of what you do is mapped out over at least 6 to 12 months, if 60% of that you can commit resource to, start planning productions around it, then that remaining 30-40%, if that's your reactive bit, then you can react properly and be smart about it. If everything you do as an organisation is 100% reactive, when the demand is going up the way it is, it's just going to become a mess. And you just end up throwing money at it, and I can imagine it's not going to end well.
I imagine everything you do, the amount of planning that just goes into like these events, being on these location sites. Is there ever anything you've had to just suddenly react to that happened that was completely unplanned or unexpected?
It's always like a freeride competition, like what I'm showing this afternoon. You know where it starts and you know when you finish, but you have no idea of what's happening between the top of the mountain and the bottom. So of course you have to be reactive. You have to know the sport because like the way you see the guy moving, you can then try to imagine what he's gonna do. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's always a surprise and someone can crash. And of course, nobody plans to crash.
No.
So it's something that you really have to be aware and be ready because we have a process about like how to react when things happen. And of course, you never know what you're gonna see.
Wow.
And that's part of the game. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any other additional questions in the audience? Anyone? Anyone? One more? Yeah.
How did you get into this sort of action sport?
How did you get into action sports?
I would say I always wanted to do that. I grew up in the mountains and being myself doing these sports at a very lower level than the athletes I film. And then I studied video 5 years. I started working in fiction movies and then in news. And then I would say I came back to what I really wanted to do, which was working in mountain sports video. So, but I would say I'm way more academic than most of the people who work with me because I come from the image, from video. Like I've been studying and working in different worlds. But most of the guys I work with come from the sports. Some were athletes, and when they got retired, they became filmers. Or some are like some mountain guides, and they like the image, so they start filming as well. So I would say we're complementary because they have a higher level than I do in going to places. But maybe I'm more professional and I know more about the workflow and the techniques. So I bring them some knowledge and they bring me some mountain or sport knowledge. So I would say it's complementary to have the two kind of people.
Nice. Yeah. It's been wonderful getting a chance to talk to both of you.
Thank you.
Any last thoughts from either of you? Nope. All right. Well, that wraps up our live webcast from IBC 2019. Thank you so much.
Thank you.